Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back in time, not as kings or knights, but as someone far more. We're heading to medieval Europe, somewhere around the 10th or 11th century. And tonight you're not just a tourist. No, you're about to become the main character in a very stressful legal drama. A little heads up: based on the justice system we're about to explore, your chances of a happy ending are, let's just say, statistically questionable. You might not even make it through the first accusation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your city and the current time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see our little community scattered across the globe, all settling in for a story. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice when you open your eyes isn't a sight, but a smell. It's a thick, complex cocktail of damp earth, wood sweat, and the faint, unmistakable scent of livestock. You're lying on a straw-filled mattress on the floor of a small, one-room hut. The walls are wattle and daub, ladders of woven sticks packed with mud, clay and straw. A few feet away, the embers of last night's fire are still faintly glowing in the central hearth, a gentle warmth against the morning chill. Your whole family is in here with you. Your parents, a couple of siblings. Personal space hasn't been invented yet. This is the original open-plan living, with none of the glamour. You sit up, the rough wool of your tunic scratching against your skin. The sun isn't fully up, but a pale, grey light filters through the single, unglazed window hole in the perpetually open doorway. No need for an alarm clock. The rooster, the birds, and the general stirring of the village are your signal to start the day. Your life is governed by two things: the sun and the seasons. And right now, the sun is telling you it's time to work. You stumble outside, your bare feet sinking slightly into the cool, muddy ground that serves as the village street. The air is fresh, carrying the promise of another long day. Your world is small, contained. You can see almost all of it from where you stand, a cluster of a dozen or so similar huts, the small stone church with its stubby little tower, and beyond that, the vast open fields, stretching towards the woods in the distance. And looming on a nearby hill, a constant, stony reminder of your place in the world, the Lord's Manor House. This brings us to a core root of your existence. Almost nothing you see is truly yours. The land you're about to toil on, the hut you sleep in, even a portion of your own time, it all belongs to the lord of the manor. This is the manorial system, the backbone of medieval society. In exchange for his protection, from whom is a good question, most the other lords, you and your family are tied to this land. You are, in essence, part of the property. You owe the lord corvée labor, which is a fancy French word for unpaid work on his personal fields, and you pay him a hefty chunk of whatever you manage to grow on the small strip of land he allows you to farm for yourselves. It's like a non-negotiable subscription service, and the monthly fee is your sweat and your harvest. Your first meal of the day is simple: a hunk of coarse, dark bread and a gulp of wits in the water skin. Surprisingly, it's not water, but a thin, watery ale. This is one of those little details of daily life that sounds strange to us, but was pure common sense. The local stream could be contaminated with all sorts of things, but the brewing process, for even the weakest beer, often called small beer, killed off most of the nasty germs. So yes, everyone, including children, drank weak ale throughout the day. It was simply the safest option. As you walk towards the fields, you pass your neighbors. You nod to Elodie, who's feeding her chickens, and grunt a greeting his ox to his plow. You know everyone here. You know their parents, their children, their business. This tight-knit community is your only safety net, but it's also a tinderbox of gossip and grudges. A shared laugh can forge a bond, but a misplaced word, you spewed over a wandering pig, can fester for years. Your reputation is your most valuable currency, because in a world without police reports or formal records, what people say about you is, for all intents and purposes, who you are. The actual degree of personal freedom a person like you possessed is something historians still get quite passionate about. Were you little more than a slave with a slightly better contract, or were you a member of a complex community with a web of customary rights and obligations that gave you some wiggle room? The answer: like most things in history, is probably somewhere messily in the middle. For now, though, life is a rhythm. Plow, plant, weed, harvest. You work until the sun hangs low in the sky, your muscles aching with a familiar, bone-deep tiredness. The day ends as it began, back in the smoky hut, sharing a simple meal of potager, thick vegetable and grain stew that's been simmering over the fire all day. The world outside your door dissolves into an immense, profound darkness, punctuated only by the stars and the distant hoot of an owl. It's hard, it's monotonous, but it's predictable. You know what tomorrow will bring, or at least you think you do. That feeling of fragile security, that predictable rhythm of life, lasts for another few weeks. It's a comforting, lulling cycle of sunup, sundown, work, undressed. But the thing about fragile security is that it's, well, fragile. And it's about to be shattered by a shout. It starts on an otherwise unremarkable morning. You're mending a handle on your wooden rake, the familiar scent of damp earth and morning dew in the air. Then you hear it not just a shout, but a roar of pure, animalistic grief and fury. It's coming from the direction of your neighbor Reginald's hut. You pause, rake forgotten. Everyone pauses, in a village this small. A sound like that is a communal event. Moments later, Reginald comes stomping through the mud, his face a blotchy mask of rage. H.E.S. not a large man, but right now he seems to swell with indignation. He stops a few feet from you, his eyes wild, and then he points a trembling, dirt-caked finger directly at you. You, he bellows, his voice cracking. You did this. You have no idea what H.E.S. talking about. You can only stare bewildered. Behind him, a small crowd is already gathering. Elodie peeks from her doorway. Thomas stops his work. This is the medieval equivalent of a viral social media post, and it's happening in real time, right on your front lawn. My ox. Reginald chokes out, tears of fury streaming through the grime on his face. Bessie is dead. She was fine yesterday, and this morning dead in her pen, poisoned. A collective gasp ripples through the onlookers. This is a disaster. An ox was the most valuable possession a peasant family could own. It was a living, breathing tractor, the key to plowing the fields efficiently. Losing an ox could mean ruin, starvation. It was more than losing a pet. It was like having your life savings, your car, and your primary source of income wiped out overnight. So Reginald's grief is understandable. His accusation, however, is not. What are you talking about? Reginald, you say, your voice steady, though a knot of cold dread is tightening in your stomach. Why would I do such a thing? Don't play the innocent with me, he spits. I saw you 2 nights ago skulking near my pen after dark. I heard you muttering. You put a curse on her, or you threw something foul in her water trough. Now you remember. 2 nights ago, one of your chickens had gotten loose and you were chasing it around in the dark. You'd stumbled near his pen. You might have muttered something in frustration, but this is a wild leap. It's a story woven from suspicion and grief. This is where that other village currency grudges comes into play. You and Reginald have not been on the best of terms. Last spring, there was a dispute over the exact boundary between your adjoining strips of land in the common field. It was a petty argument, a matter of a single furrow's width, and it ended with bitter words. You'd thought it was forgotten. Clearly, you were wrong. It was just sitting there, waiting for a spark. And the death of his ox was a very big spark. That's absurd, you say, trying to appeal to reason. But reason has left the building. Their expression's a mixture of pity for Reginald and suspicion towards you. In a world where God's will and the devil's mischief are seen in every blighted crop and sick animal, an accusation of malice is dangerously close to an accusation of something darker. This is the scary part of that tight-knit community. It can be a safety net, but it can also be a web. Your reputation, once questioned, is incredibly hard to repair. It's not like you can pull up security footage to prove you were just chasing a chicken. It's his word against yours, and right now, he has the more dramatic, more compelling story. He has a dead ox. All you have is a denial. Historians often debate how these everyday disputes were typically resolved. Did every argument escalate like this? Probably not. Most were likely settled with shouting, mediation by a village elder, or a grudging agreement to pay a small fine. But the records we have are biased. They tend to document the conflicts that spun out of control, the ones that couldn't be solved with a simple apology. And yours, it seems, is heading in that direction. Reginald, seeing he has the crowd's sympathy, presses his advantage. He was jealous of Bessie. Everyone knows he wanted an ox of his own. He couldn't afford one, so he destroyed mine. It's a toxic but effective narrative. It combines motive jealousy, opportunity you were seen near the pen, and a tragic outcome, the dead ox. In the court of public opinion, the case is already building against you. It's a frightening demonstration of how quickly your quiet, predictable life can be dismantled by nothing more than a neighbor's accusation. You realize that in this world, the truth doesn't always matter as what people can be convinced to believe. The idea of animal trials even existed in this period, where a pig that harmed a person could be formally tried and sentenced. If a pig could be a defendant, the line between a believable and an unbelievable accusation against a human was terrifyingly thin. In taking this to the Lord, Reginald declares, his voice ringing with righteous conviction, "Well, see what he has to say about this. Well, see what justice is done for my Bessie." The word Lord hangs in the air, cold and heavy. This is no longer a village spat. It's about to become an official matter. Your stomach drops. The small, familiar world you woke up in this morning has suddenly become a cage, and the door just slammed shut. The walk to the Lord's Manor is the longest, most humiliating journey of your life. It's not far in distance. You can see it from your hut every single day, but today each step feels heavy, laden with dread. You're not being dragged in chains. It's far more informal and, in a way, more intimidating than that. You're simply walking with Reginald a few paces ahead of you and a curious procession of villagers trailing behind. They're not hostile, not yet. They are simply watching. It feels like you're a prey, and they're all waiting to see the final act. You arrive at the manor house. It's not a grand fairy tale castle. There are no soaring turrets or shimmering flags. It's a solid, practical, two-story stone building, built for defense as much as for comfort. It's larger than anything else in the village, dominating the landscape. Its stone walls are a constant, silent declaration of power. This is where the decisions that shape your life are made. You're not led into the fancy private chambers. Justice, for people like you, is a public affair dispensed in the main hall. This is the heart of the manor, a large, open room with a high, timbered ceiling darkened by years of soot from the massive fireplace. The floor is paved with stone flags, and the air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, roasting meat, and unwashed dogs that are currently snoozing by the hearth. This is where the Lord eats, entertains, and, when necessary, holds court. There's no elevated judge's bench, no jury box. The Lord Baron William is simply sitting at his long wooden dining table, gnawing on a piece of bread and cheese. H.E.S., a thick-set man in his 40s, his face weathered from hunts and the occasional border scuffle. H.E.S. not wearing a crown or lavish robes, just a practical tunic of good quality wool, better than yours but still functional. His authority doesn't come from props, it comes from the fact that he owns everything, including, in a sense, you. His steward, a thin, balding man with a perpetually worried expression, stands beside him. The steward is the one who actually runs the day-to-day business of the manor. He can probably read and write, a rare and powerful skill that makes him indispensable. This is the manor court, or Helmote. It's the lowest strung of the legal ladder, dealing with local disputes, enforcement of manorial duties, and minor infractions. It's less of a formal court and more of a deeply intimidating community meeting chaired by a man with absolute power. There are no lawyers to speak for you. There is no presumption of innocence. The very concept of innocent, until proven guilty, is a distant dream, centuries away from being formulated. Right now, you are simply the accused. Reginald, and by the setting, launches into his story again. H.E.S. more dramatic this time, adding gestures. his voice thick with emotion as he describes finding his beloved Bessie cold and still. He recounts seeing you lurking near the pen, embellishing your muttering into a sinister incantation. The villagers who followed you all stand by the door, their faces unreadable, listening to every word. When HES finished, the Baron turns his impassive gaze to you. His eyes are grey and hard like river stones. Well, he says, his voice a low rumble. What do you have to say for yourself? The floor is yours. The entire room is silent, waiting. This is your chance to defend yourself. You repeat your story. Your chicken got loose. You were chasing it. You meant no harm. You speak of the old argument over the land boundary, suggesting this might be a grudge. You try to sound reasonable, calm, but your voice feels small in the cavernous hall, and your story sounds so mundane compared to Reginald Dest's tale of jealousy and dark curses. The Baron listens, stroking his beard. HES not just weighing the evidence, HES performing a complex social calculation. He needs to keep the peace in his village. A dead ox is a serious economic blow, not just to Reginald, but to the productivity of the manor as a whole. He needs to be seen to be dispensing justice, to be firm. But he also knows that a false accusation can be just as disruptive. Your family provides labor after all. One of the oddities of this system is that fines were a very common punishment. And who did the fines go to? The Lord, of course. This created a rather awkward incentive. Some historians argue that these courts were less about justice and more about revenue generation for the Lord. Is the Baron looking for the truth, or is he looking for the most profitable outcome? It's a cynical thought, but one that probably crosses the mind of every peasant standing where you are. The Baron then does something you don't expect. He turns to the crowd of villagers at the door. He points to Thomas, your neighbor with the ox. Thomas, you know both these men. What do you think? This is terrifying. HES polling the audience. Your fate might rest on the casual opinion of your neighbors. Thomas shuffles his feet, clearly uncomfortable. My lord, he says, his voice barely a whisper. Reginald is a good man, but his temper is known. And well, everyone knows about the argument they had over the field. It's not a ringing endorsement, but it's something. It's a seed of doubt planted in the Baron's mind. He then looks at Elodie. She just shrugs, looking at the floor. She doesn't want to get involved. You see now that the community, your supposed safety net, is hedging its bets. No one wants to be on the wrong side of the eventual loser. The Baron lets out a heavy sigh. It's a stalemate. Reginald Dest's word against yours. There are no other witnesses. No hard evidence. The community is divided. In our modern world, this would be the end of it. Case dismissed for lack of evidence. But this is not the modern world. The lack of a clear answer isn't a reason to stop, it's a reason to escalate. The system has a way of dealing with uncertainty. A very old, very intimidating way. The Baron leans back, the legs of his heavy wooden chair scraping against the stone floor. The sound echoes in the tense silence of the hall. He looks from your face, desperate and pleading, to Reginald Des, which is still a mask of righteous anger. This is a mess, he declares, not to anyone in particular, but to the room at large. A classic, he said. Your word against his. It gives me a headache. You feel a flicker of hope. Maybe hell'll just tell you both to go home and sort it out. Maybe hell impose a small fine on both of you for disturbing the peace. But his next words extinguish that hope completely. We need a better way to get to the truth of this. A stronger proof. He turns to his steward, the thin man who has been silent until now. What does the old custom demand in such a case? The steward clears his throat. My lord, when a man of good standing is accused of a crime by another, and there are no direct witnesses, the accused may clear his name by oath. This is it. The first formal ancient mechanism for escaping your predicament. It's a system called compurgation or oath helping. It's not about you swearing an oath. It's about you getting other people to swear an oath for you. The idea is that if you are truly an honest and reputable person, you should be able to find a certain number of other honest and reputable people who are willing to stake their own immortal souls on your innocence. Very well, the Baron says, looking at you. Can you find men to swear for you? The steward specifies the terms. For a crime this serious, destroying another man's livelihood, which is essentially theft and vandalism rolled into one, you will need 12 men. 12 oath helpers. They don't have to have been witnesses. They don't need to know anything about the dead ox. They only need to know you. They will come to the church, place their hands on a holy relic, perhaps a saint's knuckle bone or a piece of the true cross, which were surprisingly common commodities back then, and swear that they believe your oath of innocence is clean and true. It's a character witness system, but with the highest possible stakes. If they lie, they are committing perjury not just in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of God. They are risking eternal damnation for you. The logic is simple: who would be foolish enough to risk hellfire for a liar and a scoundrel? Therefore, if you can find 12 men willing to do this, you must be telling the truth. A fascinatingly weird detail about this process is the precision required. The oath had to be recited perfectly, word for word. Any stutter could be interpreted as a sign from God that the oath was false. There are recorded cases where a man was deemed guilty because one of his oath helpers stumbled over a single word. It was a high-pressure, spiritually charged performance, so the challenge is laid before you. Find 12 men, 12 good men and true. You immediately start a mental inventory. Your father, of course. That's 3. What about your uncle? He lives in the next village, but he might come. 4. Thomas, the neighbor who spoke up for you, maybe. He seems torn. 5, possibly. But 12 is a huge number. In a village this small, you'd need to convince nearly every adult male household head to stand with you. You look around at the faces of the villagers still gathered at the door. You see doubt. They are weighing their relationship with you against their fear of Reginald Dess' anger, their fear of the Baron, and most of all their fear of God. Siding with a potentially guilty man in such a sacred matter is not a small ask. Over the next few days you try. You go from hut to hut, your heart in your throat. You speak with men you've known your whole life. Some agree immediately, like your family. Others are hesitant. It's a serious thing, this oath. Reginald has lost his ox. That's a fact. Your innocence, that's just a claim. Another one, a man you shared Dale with just a few weeks ago, won't even meet your eye. He mutters something about not wanting to get involved. Reginald, meanwhile, is not idle. He has been working the village too, reminding everyone of his loss, his grief, his certainty of your guilt. He is reinforcing his narrative, making it harder for people to side with you. The community is fracturing. Lines are being drawn. After a week of desperate pleading, the reality becomes clear. You can't do it. You have 8 men who will swear for you. A respectable number, but not the required 12. The system designed to rely on a strong community reputation has failed you. Or perhaps it has worked exactly as intended, reflecting the genuine doubt that now hangs over your name. You have to return to the Baron and admit your failure. The feeling of defeat is a physical weight pressing down on your chest. You stand before him once again in the Great Hall. Reginald is there, a grimly triumphant look on his face. I cannot find 12 men, my lord, you say, your voice hollow. The Baron nods slowly, as if he expected this. The failure of the oath-helping process doesn't automatically mean you are guilty. Historians are still debating what, exactly, a failure to secure enough oath helpers signified. Was it a de facto admission of guilt, or simply a procedural failure that required moving to the next step in your case? It's the latter. A pity, the Baron says, though he doesn't sound particularly pitying. It seems your reputation is not strong enough to clear your name. And Reginald Dess' loss is too great to ignore. He leans forward, his voice dropping. Since man cannot determine the truth of this matter, we must turn to a higher authority. We will put this matter in God's hands. He looks towards the village priest, who has been quietly observing from the side of the room. Father, prepare for an ordeal. The word ordeal lands in the hall with a thud. It's a word you know, a word whispered in stories and invoked in the most serious of disputes. It's the final, terrifying result of a legal system that has run out of ideas. The moment the Baron says it, a different kind of silence falls over the room. The murmuring stops. The fidgeting ceases. Even Reginald's triumphant expression hardens into something more somber. This is no longer about village politics or a dead ox. This is no longer about village politics or a dead ox. This is now a matter of theology. The village priest, Father Michael, steps forward. He is a man you've known your whole life. You've seen him every Sunday in the small stone church. He baptized you. He hears your confessions, or at least the small, mundane sins you're willing to admit to. He is generally a kind man, but now, as he assumes this new role in your fate, he seems transformed. His face is grave, his eyes distant, as if H.E.S. already communing with the higher power H.E.S. about to invoke. An ordeal, Father Michael repeats, his voice soft but carrying in the stillness. It is a grave matter, but when the truth is hidden from the eyes of men, we must humbly ask for a sign from God Almighty, who sees all things. This is the core, the absolute heart, of what is about to happen to you. The trial by ordeal, or judicium Dei, are the judgment of God. The entire premise rests on a single powerful belief that the Christian God is an interventionist deity. He is not a distant clockmaker who wound up the universe and let it run. No, he is an active participant in human affairs, and crucially he is just. Therefore it was believed that if a truly innocent person were subjected to a life-threatening test, God would perform a miracle, however small, to protect them. He would intervene to reveal the truth. Your innocence or guilt wouldn't be decided by the Baron or a jury, it would be revealed by a divine sign. It sounds utterly bizarre to us, a terrifying perversion of justice. But to the medieval mind, it was a logical extension of their worldview. Everything was a sign from God. A good harvest was a blessing. A plague was a punishment. Why wouldn't a legal proceeding work the same way the use of ordeals was some fringe, pagan holdover? Either, for centuries, it was codified in law. Charlemagne, the great unifier of Europe, sanctioned their use. Laws from England to Germany to Italy detailed exactly how they should be carried out, often with the full participation of the Church. Father Michael begins to explain the options. It's not a choice you get to make, but it's presented as if it were a menu of divine inquiries. The customs of this land and the nature of the accusation allow for several paths to God's judgment, he intones. He speaks of the ordeal of cold water, he speaks of the ordeal of boiling water, and he speaks of the ordeal of hot iron. Each one is a carefully constructed theological test. The thinking behind them was surprisingly complex. The elements themselves, water, fire, were seen as pure. They were God's creation. Therefore, a pure element would reject something impure, something corrupted by the sin of a lie. The priest's words paint vivid, terrifying pictures in your mind. You can almost feel the icy shock of the river, the searing heat of the cauldron. This isn't a punishment yet. That's the crucial, mind-bending distinction. The ordeal itself is not the punishment. It is the trial. It is the method of discovery. The punishment, if you are found guilty, comes later. The question of who decided which ordeal was used is something historians still discuss. Was it the nature of the crime, the social status of the accused, or the personal preference of the local lord or priest? There seems to have been a great deal of regional variation. For instance, the ordeal of cold water was often used for those of lower status, or for accusations of witchcraft, as it was believed that water, used in baptism, would reject a servant of the devil. The Baron listens to the priest, stroking his beard thoughtfully. He looks at you, a man of the earth, a farmer. He looks at Reginald, a man who has lost his working animal. This is a crime of the land, a crime of hands on malice. The iron, the Baron says finally, his voice decisive. The hot iron, it is a fitting test for a crime of this nature. A shiver, cold and sharp, runs down your spine. The hot iron. You've heard stories. It's considered one of the most severe ordeals. The finality in the Baron's voice is absolute. There is no appeal. You can't ask for a different ordeal. You can't demand a recount of your oath helpers. The path is set. Father Michael nods, his expression unchanging. So be it. The ordeal of hot iron shall be prepared. In 3 days' time. He then turns his gaze directly to you, and for the first time, you see a flicker of something that might be pity in his eyes. My son, he says, You must now prepare yourself. Your trial has begun. Use these next 3 days to purify your body and your soul. Fast and pray. Pray that God, in His infinite mercy, will see the truth in your heart and make it known to us all. You are dismissed. As you walk out of the hall, the villagers part to let you through. Their faces are no longer merely curious. They are a mixture of awe, fear, and a strange, morbid excitement. You are no longer just their neighbor who might be a thief. You are a vessel. You are the subject of a divine experiment. And in 3 days, everyone will gather to see the result. As you stumble out of the manor hall and back into the pale sunlight, Father Michael's words about the different ordeals echo in your mind. The iron has been chosen for you, but you can't help but contemplate the path not taken. What if the Baron had chosen the water specifically, the ordeal of cold water, the judicium aequae frigidei? You walk past the village pond on your way back to your hut. It's a murky, placid body of water, home to ducks and croaking frogs. You've swum in it on hot summer days. Now, you look at it with a new sense of dread. This ordinary pond could have become your courtroom. Here's how it would have worked. Father Michael would have led a solemn procession, including you, Reginald, the Baron, and half the village to the water's edge. The water itself would first need to be prepared. The priest would perform an exorcism on it, not because it was possessed, but to drive out any demonic influence that might try to interfere with God's judgment. He would pray, asking the water not to receive the body of a liar, someone corrupted by a false oath. Then comes your part. You would be bound. A rope would be tied around your waist, and your right thumb would be tied to your left big toe, and your left thumb to your right big toe. This wasn't necessarily to make you sink, as many people assume. The rope held by someone on the bank was your safety line, ensuring you could be pulled out. The bindings were more about ritual constraint, rendering you helpless and placing you entirely at the mercy of the water. Then you would be lowered in. This is where the popular image often gets it wrong. The goal was not to see if you drowned. It was to see if you sank. The theological logic was this water is a pure element, and the water used for baptism is particularly holy. It accepts a true Christian. Therefore, if you were innocent and your heart was pure, the holy water would accept you. You would sink. Sinking was a sign of innocence. The rope was there to pull you up, sputtering and half drowned but officially vindicated by God. But if you were guilty, if you had sworn a false oath and your soul was stained by sin, the holy, exorcised water would reject you. It would refuse to accept your impure body. You would float. Floating was the sign of guilt. It's a bizarre counterintuitive system. Our modern, instinctual reaction is of course they would float. Human bodies are naturally buoyant, but they didn't see it through the lens of physics, they saw it through the lens of faith. The fact that floating was the natural outcome only made it a more powerful sign of divine rejection in their eyes. This specific ordeal has a dark and famous association with the later witch trials, but its use was much broader in the early medieval period. It was used for all sorts of crimes. There's a fascinating and slightly comical detail in some legal texts about this ordeal. They specify and not be tied in the safety rope at a certain distance from your body. The texts state that if your hair sinks past this knot, you are considered innocent. This suggests they understood that sinking wasn't an all-or-nothing event and tried to standardize the proof of sinking. It's a weirdly bureaucratic approach to a miracle. The great debate among historians is, of course, how often did this actually happen? And how was it manipulated? A priest, perhaps believing in an accused person's innocence, could weigh their clothes down with a small, concealed stone. Or if he believed them guilty, he might ensure their clothes were particularly airy, or that they were lowered in a way that trapped hair. The potential for human interference was enormous. Was the priest a neutral facilitator of God's will, or was he the one actually making the decision, using the ordeal as a form of divine theater to legitimize a verdict HD already reached? We will likely never know for sure. So as you stand by the pond, you imagine it. The rough chafe of the ropes, the shock of the cold water, the desperate gasp for air, the terrifying feeling of being suspended between sinking and floating, your fate being decided by the ripples on the surface. And you realize, with a fresh wave of fear, that surviving the ordeal isn't the point. It's about what the ordeal means. Floating would have meant you were guilty. You would be pulled out, shivering and disgraced, to face your punishment, perhaps a brutal fine, mutilation, or even death, depending on the severity of the crime and the mood of the Lord. Sinking meant you were innocent, but you still had to be hauled out before you actually drowned. It was a terrible choice between two kinds of suffocation, one by water, one by judgment. You turn away from the pond and continue towards your hut. The ordeal of water is not your fate. Your fate lies with fire. You don't know if that's better or worse, but it feels more direct, more elemental. The water was about rejection or acceptance. The fire, you suspect, will simply be about pain. Your mind, now a churning vortex of fear, moves from the cold water of the pond to a different kind of terror. What if the Baron had chosen the other vessel of judgment that Father Michael mentioned, the ordeal of boiling water, the judicium quae fervent is? You imagine it taking place in the churchyard, a large cauldron set over a roaring fire. The whole village would be there, the same crowd, the same expectant faces. The ritual would be just as solemn, just as steeped in prayer and holy procedure. Father Michael would bless the cauldron, the fire, and the water, asking God to use them as his instrument. This ordeal had a few variations, but the most common one was terrifyingly simple. The priest would drop a stone or a metal ring into the bottom of a cauldron of furiously bubbling water. Your task would be to plunge your arm into the water, down to the elbow, and retrieve it. Just think about that for a second. It's not a quick dip of the fingers. It's your entire forearm, submerged in a liquid that is actively boiling. The immediate, searing pain would be unimaginable. It's a test that, on a purely physical level, seems impossible to pass without grievous injury. But again, the logic was not physical, it was theological. The belief was that God would protect the innocent. This protection could manifest in a few ways. The most dramatic, the stuff of saints' legends, would be a true miracle. You plunge your arm in, and it emerges completely unharmed, as if you'd just dipped it in cool spring water. This was the ideal outcome, the unambiguous, movie magic sign of God's favor. But miracles were by definition rare. The more common expectation was a bit more nuanced and formed the second stage of the trial, much like the one you are about to face with the hot iron. After you retrieved the stone and your arm was pulled from the cauldron, the priest would immediately bind it in consecrated cloth and seal it. 3 days later, the bandage would be removed. If the wound was healing cleanly, without festering or infection, it was a sign of innocence. God had aided your recovery. But if the wound was blistered, infected, and purulent, it was a sign of guilt. God had abandoned you to the natural, corrupting consequences of your injury. So the trial wasn't just about the moment of pain, it was about the aftermath. It turned your own body's immune system into a witness for or against you. This ordeal was often seen as a step up in severity from the cold water. There are some historical law codes that seem to prescribe it for more serious crimes. But there's also a strange class-based element that historians have noted. While nobles almost always face trial by combat, we'll get to that later, commoners were the primary subjects of these physical ordeals. And sometimes, the boiling water ordeal had a strange twist that made it almost a luxury version. A wealthy accused person could pay a champion to undergo the ordeal for them. Think about that, you could hire a substitute to have their arm boiled on your behalf. How the guilt or innocence of the substitute's healing arm was supposed to reflect on the soul of the person who paid them is a theological puzzle that raises more questions than it answers. It's a fascinating example of how even the judgment of God could sometimes be influenced by money. And what about the potential for cheating? It's a question that modern minds can't help but ask. Was the water always at a full rolling boil like a priest, sympathetic to the accused, could perhaps manage the fire so the water was merely very hot, rather than dangerously boiling? Or perhaps the stone was placed in a shallow part of the cauldron. Conversely, a priest convinced of your guilt could ensure the fire was stoked to its absolute maximum. And with humans comes the potential for bias, mercy, or malice. Academics are still fiercely debating the extent of this manipulation. Were priests cynical stage managers, or were they devout believers who trusted the process and tried to administer it as fairly as possible according to their beliefs that truth is likely a spectrum, with different priests in different places acting in different ways? As you stand outside your hut, you clench your hands, flexing your fingers. You imagine the steam, the bubbling surface, the moment of commitment, plunging your own hand into that agony. You think about the 3 days of waiting that would follow, every throb of pain in your arm a tick of a clock, counting down to your verdict. Compared to that, the cold water seems almost gentle. But both are terrifying in their own way. The cold water plays on the fear of drowning and rejection. The boiling water is a direct confrontation with pure, unadulterated pain, and neither of them is the test that has been chosen for you. Yours is the iron. Dry heat, a solid, heavy weight of divine judgment that you will have to hold in your own hand. The ordeal of cold water is a terror of the deep. The ordeal of boiling water is a terror of the cauldron. But your fate, the one decreed by the Baron, is the ordeal of hot iron, the judicium feri condentes. It feels somehow more personal. You won't be submerged in an element, you will have to actively pick up and hold the instrument of your judgment. As the next 3 days pass in a blur of fear and forced piety, the details of this specific trial consume your thoughts. Father Michael has explained it to you, partly as a spiritual guide, partly as a technical instructor for the divine test you are about to take. There are 2 main forms of the hot iron ordeal. The first, and arguably the more common, involves carrying a heated piece of iron over a set distance. The second involves walking barefoot over a number of red-hot plowshares laid out on the ground. The Baron, in his wisdom, has chosen the first for you. The procedure is rigid, ceremonial. On the day of the trial, a fire will be consecrated in the church itself. A piece of iron weighing exactly 1 pound, as specified by many ancient law codes, will be placed in the flames. During the final part of the Mass, the priest will pray over the iron, asking God to cool it for the innocent and let it burn the guilty. The symbolism is potent. Fire, like water, is a purifying element. It burns away impurities. The question is, are you the impurity? Then you will be brought forward. The priest will sprinkle you with holy water, another layer of spiritual protection and purification. You will be given the Eucharist. This is a crucial step. It was believed that a person in a state of mortal sin, such as that of a liar about to undergo an ordeal, would be spiritually harmed by taking communion. Some stories even tell of the guilty choking on the holy wafer. Finally, the iron will be pulled from the fire, glowing a terrifying orange earth, and you will have to take it. You will have to hold this 1 pound piece of incandescent metal in your bare hand and walk 9 feet. The distance measured out in the church are by the length of your own foot 3 paces of 3 feet each. 9 feet. It sounds like nothing. When you walk to the fields, you cover that distance in a couple of careless strides. But on that day, with that weight of burning judgment in your palm, those 9 feet will be the longest journey of your life. This ordeal was often considered the noblest of the common ordeals, sometimes reserved for people of slightly higher social standing than those subjected to the water ordeals, though still firmly below the aristocracy. A famous case from history is that of Queen Emma, the mother of King Edward the Confessor of England. Accused of adultery, she legendarily proved her innocence by walking barefoot over 9 red-hot plowshares completely unharmed. This is a story from a chronicle written by monks who revered her, so it's likely more of a pious public relations story than a factual account. But it shows how deeply the idea of this ordeal was embedded in the culture from the lowest peasant to the highest queen. The weirdest and most debated part of this is the iron itself. How hot was it? Really, skeptics and historians have long wondered about the tricks that could be employed. Could a priest apply some sort of protective salve to the accused's hand beforehand? Under the guise of a blessing, there are recipes for concoctions that supposedly grant temporary resistance to fire, though their effectiveness is highly dubious. Or more simply, could the iron be heated to a point where it was merely very, very hot, rather than truly red hot? This leads to a fascinating bit of physics known as the Leidenfrost effect. It's the phenomenon you see when you sprinkle water on a skillet that is much hotter than the water's boiling point. The droplets skitter across the surface, insulated by a layer of their own steam. Some have theorized that if the iron was hot enough, and the hand was wet enough perhaps from that sprinkling of holy water, this effect could momentarily protect the skin from the worst of the burn. Is it possible that a miraculous lack of injury was actually a quirk of science that they interpreted as an act of God? It's a compelling theory, though impossible to prove. The academic world remains divided on whether these ordeals were exercises in faith, cynical manipulations, or occasionally accidental demonstrations of physics. But for you, huddled in your hut, these theories offer no comfort. You won't be a character in a queen's legend or a subject in a physics experiment. You are just you. Your hand is not coated in any mythical salve. Your fate depends on the temperature of a piece of metal and the interpretation of your subsequent wound. You look at your hands. They are rough, calloused from years of manual labor. They are strong, but they are not strong enough to resist fire. You try to imagine the sensation. The hiss as the metal meets your skin. The immediate, overwhelming wave of pain. The smell of your own flesh burning. You feel a surge of nausea. You have to hold on. You have to walk 9 feet. And then, like the other ordeals, your hand will be bandaged and sealed. And for 3 days you will wait. Wait for the bandage to be unwrapped. Wait to see if your flesh is clean and healing, or festering and corrupt. Wait for God, or the priest, or the state of your immune system, to pronounce you innocent or guilty. The iron is not the end. It is simply the terrifying, fiery gateway to the final judgment. As you sit there, dreading the moment you'll have to grasp the glowing piece of iron, a fleeting, bitter thought crosses your mind. If you were the Baron, this wouldn't be happening. If you were a knight, or any man of noble birth, you wouldn't be facing a test of your flesh against a real element. The aristocracy had their own, entirely different, form of divine judgment, the trial by combat, or judicial duel. It was, in essence, a lawsuit settled with swords. Imagine the scene. Instead of you and Reginald standing before the Baron in his hall, 2 fully armored knights would be facing each other on a designated field. One would be fighting on behalf of Reginald. The accuser, the other, would be fighting on your behalf, the accused. The logic was a direct parallel to the ordeal. Your facing God would not allow fighters to be defeated. He would grant strength, skill, and fortune to the knight fighting for the truth. The winner of the duel didn't just win the fight, they won the legal case. The verdict was delivered by the final, bloody blow. This practice was widespread across Europe for centuries and was seen as a perfectly legitimate, if brutal, way of resolving disputes that couldn't be settled by witness or oath. It wasn't for petty squabbles, it was for the most serious accusations, treason, murder, or egregious theft between members of the upper classes. Of course, a nobleman didn't always have to fight himself. Much like the weird possibility of hiring a substitute for the boiling water ordeal, a noble could appoint a champion to fight for him. This was especially common if the accuser or accused was a woman, a child, a clergyman, or an elderly man. This created a whole profession of champions for hire, essentially medieval legal gladiators. These were skilled, hardened warriors who made a living by fighting in other people's lawsuits. Their reputation and track record were everything. Hiring a famous, undefeated champion was the medieval equivalent of hiring a high-powered, celebrity lawyer. The duel itself was a highly ritualized affair. The field of combat, known as the lists, was prepared and blessed. Before the fight, both champions would swear solemn oaths on holy relics, declaring the truth of their cause. They were searched for any hidden weapons or magical amulets, a fascinating little detail, the child that shows they would fight. The rules could vary. Sometimes it was a fight to the death, other times to the point of surrender, and in some cases, it ended if a combatant was forced out of the designated field. If your champion won, you were declared innocent, your name cleared. But if your champion lost, the consequences were dire. Not only were you pronounced guilty of the original crime, but the defeated champion often faced punishment as well. In some legal traditions, a defeated champion who survived the fight would have his right hand cut off for backing a full scores. The stakes were incredibly high for everyone involved. The whole concept feels like something out of a fantasy novel, but it was a very real part of the legal landscape. One of the most famous accounts of a judicial duel comes from 14th century France. involving a knight named Jean de Carouges who accused his squire, Jacques of a terrible crime against his wife. When the case couldn't be proven, the king authorized a trial by combat. The duel was a massive public spectacle, attended by the royal court. Carouges ultimately won, killing Negris, and his victory was taken as absolute proof of his wife's truthfulness. The story has been told and retold for centuries, a stark example of this system in action. Historians still argue about the true nature of the judicial duel. Was it really a deeply held belief in God's intervention, or was it more of a societal pressure valve a way for powerful, aggressive men to settle their disputes in a structured, legal way, rather than resorting to private wars and endless blood feuds, which were a constant problem in the early Middle Ages? By channeling their violence into a sanctioned, one-on-one combat, the system might have actually reduced wider social chaos. It was a brutal form of dispute resolution, but perhaps less brutal than the alternative. You shake your head, the vision of clashing swords and armored knights fading. That is a world away from yours. There will be no champion to fight for you. No gleaming armor or noble cause. Just you, in your rough woolen tunic, standing in a church aisle. Your opponent isn't another person. It's a piece of inanimate metal. And your only defense, your only hope, is that the God who supposedly guides the swords of knights will also choose to soothe the fire for a lowly peasant. The sheer gap between the world of the powerful and your own has never felt so stark. As your mind spirals, exploring these terrifying alternate realities, the duel it snags on one more possibility, one that seems almost comical in its absurdity compared to the raw violence of the others. What if the Baron, in a particularly strange mood, had ordered the ordeal of the cursed morsel, the judicium of fime, or specifically, the ordeal of bread and cheese? Yes, you heard that right, bread and cheese. It sounds like a ploughman's lunch, not a method of divine judgment, but it was a very real, if less common, type of ordeal, typically reserved for one specific group, the clergy. When a priest or a monk was accused of a crime, subjecting them to a bloody or potentially fatal ordeal was often seen as unseemly. After all, their hands were consecrated for holding the Eucharist, so a different kind of test was needed, one that was internal and theological. Here's how this peculiar trial would work. A small piece of bread, usually barley bread, and a little bit of cheese would be placed on the altar. The accused priest would stand before it, and a special prayer or adjuration would be read out. This prayer was essentially a formal curse, calling upon God to choke the priest if he was lying. The prayer might say something like, "If this man is guilty of the crime he denies, may the angel of the Lord constrict his throat, so that he cannot swallow this morsel." Then the accused had to eat the bread and cheese. The entire trial hinged on that simple act, swallowing. If the priest ate the bread and cheese without any trouble, he was declared innocent. God had allowed the food to pass. But if he choked, gagged, or was physically unable to swallow it, he was deemed guilty. The divine curse had taken effect, proving his perjury. It's a perfect example of psychosomatic justice. The sheer terror and guilt of lying while a formal curse is read over you could easily make your mouth go dry and your throat tighten, making it physically difficult to swallow a lump of dry bread. It weaponized anxiety. The ordeal wasn't testing your body against fire or water, but your conscience against a piece of food. There's a famous story, likely apocryphal but widely told, about Earl Godwin of Wessex in the 11th century. He was accused of involvement in the murder of the king's brother. At a royal banquet, to prove his innocence, he supposedly took a piece of bread and said, "May this morsel be my last if I am guilty," and promptly choked to death on it. Historians today generally agree he probably died of a stroke, but the fact that the story was told and believed shows how potent the idea of the cursed morsel was in the medieval imagination. It was a compelling narrative, God's judgment, served up at the dinner table. Thinking about it now, it seems almost gentle. No burns, no drowning. Just a bit of bread. But the psychological pressure must have been immense. And it brings up the same old questions of manipulation. What if the bread was intentionally stale and hard? What if the piece was cut deliberately large? A vindictive accuser could easily stack the physical odds against the person being tested. And why bread and cheese? Some scholars suggest it has deep roots in Christian symbolism. Bread is, of course, linked to the Eucharist, the body of Christ. Eating it as part of a lie would be a profound sacrilege. The cheese is a bit more mysterious. It might have just been a common, everyday food item, making the ordeal relatable. There's a curious cold case in food history. Here some have speculated that the cheese used might have been made with rennet from an animal that had not been properly tied to the church, adding another layer of potential sin to the act. But this is deep into the realm of historical conjecture. You almost let out a bitter laugh. Imagine if that was your test. You, Reginald, and the Baron all gathered around a piece of stale bread. It seems so much less dramatic, so much less final than the glowing iron that awaits you. But, as you think more about it, a chill runs through you. In its own way, the ordeal of the morsel is just as terrifying. It's an invasion of your innermost self. The other ordeals test your body from the outside. The bread and cheese ordeal attempts to reach directly into your soul, using your own physiological reactions as proof of your guilt. There's nowhere to hide. You realize that all these methods, from the grand violence of the duel to the bizarre ritual of the cursed bread, spring from the same rooted desperate need for certainty in an uncertain world. When human judgment fails, when oaths are not trusted, when there are no witnesses, the society turned to a higher power. They created these elaborate, dangerous, and sometimes downright weird rituals to force an answer from the heavens. Each ordeal was a question posed directly to God. Peasant life and your disputed reputation have become the living embodiment of that question. The 3 days of preparation are not a time of quiet contemplation. Your trial has become the biggest event in the village since the last wedding or the plague scare 5 years ago. Your personal nightmare has turned into a form of public entertainment. On the second day of your fast, you see Thomas and a few other men from the village clearing the path to the church. They're not doing it for you or for God, really. They're doing it for the visitors. News travels fast, carried by merchants on the road and shepherds moving their flocks. People from the neighboring villages have heard that a Judaism day is to take place. Your ordeal is a spectacle. It's a combination of a high-stakes sporting event, a solemn religious ceremony, and a macabre reality show. For the people of the surrounding area, it's a break from the relentless monotony of their own lives. It's drama. It's a chance to see God's power made manifest, or at least, to see someone's hand get badly burned. By the morning of the third day, the day of the trial, the atmosphere in your small village is completely transformed. It's buzzing like a market day, but with a strange, nervous energy. Makeshift stalls have popped up near the churchyard. A woman is selling small meat pies. Their savory scent a particular kind of torture to you on your third day of fasting. Another man has a barrel of ale set up, and HES doing a brisk trade. HES essentially running a pop-up for the trial goers. This commercialization of justice might seem shockingly cynical to us, but it was a simple reality. A large public gathering, for any reason, was an economic opportunity. People needed to eat and drink. A local artisan might use the crowd to sell a few extra wooden bowls or a bit of cloth. The line between sacred and profane, between a solemn legal proceeding and a village fair, was incredibly blurry. Even the church itself might profit. Spectators, moved by the solemnity of the occasion or just looking to hedge their bets with the Almighty, would be encouraged to leave a donation, perhaps a small coin or a candle. Justice, it seems, has always had associated costs. You see faces you don't recognize, people pointing at your hut and whispering, "You are the celebrity of this grim festival." You feel a new kind of humiliation, a sense of being reduced to an object of morbid curiosity. Your fear and your potential pain are the day's main attraction. Even your accuser, Reginald, seems to be playing a role for the crowd. He walks through the village, his expression a carefully crafted mask of sorrowful determination. He accepts condolences for his dead oaks from strangers, recounting his version of events to any who will listen. HES not just an accuser anymore, HES a protagonist in the public drama, the righteous man seeking divine vindication. This public nature of the ordeal served a very specific purpose for the authorities, a fact that historians often emphasize. It was just about determining your guilt or innocence. It was about demonstrating the power of the Lord and the Church. The Baron, by ordering the ordeal, shows that he is a just ruler who will go to any lengths to find the truth. The Church, by administering it, reinforces its role as the essential intermediary between the human and the divine, will be seen by everyone. It's a powerful piece of propaganda. If you are found guilty, it's a stark warning to everyone else about the consequences of crime. If you are found innocent, it demonstrates that the system, guided by God, works. Either way, the established order is reinforced. A strange and little-known aspect of this is the concept of infamy. In some medieval legal codes, even if you were to be proven innocent by the ordeal, the mere fact that you were accused and had to undergo it was enough. You would be considered infamous, which could have real legal consequences, like being barred from acting as a witness in future disputes. So even in the best-case scenario, you might not walk away completely unscathed. The accusation itself leaves a permanent stain. Whether this was a universally applied rule or a more localized custom is a subject of academic debate. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, you know the time is approaching. The festive atmosphere outside your hut only serves to deepen your sense of isolation. All those people, the food sellers, the ale drinkers, the gossiping strangers, they will watch you undergo an agony that you can't comprehend. And then they will go home, their day's entertainment over. You, however, will have to live with the consequences, whatever they may be. The scars on your hand, the verdict on your name, the way your neighbors look at you for the rest of your life. The spectacle isn't for you. You are simply the unwilling star. The real audience is society itself, and the performance is designed to remind them of the rules, both human and divine, that govern their world. The moment you've been dreading arrives with a quiet knock at your door. It's not the Baron's guards, but a young acolyte from the church, a boy with wide, serious eyes. "It is time," he says softly. "This is the beginning of the end of your preparation." The last 3 days have been an ordeal in themselves, a period of ritual purification designed to make you a worthy vessel for God's judgment. The first and most demanding part of this was the fast. For 3 days, you have eaten nothing but bread and water, and very little of that. The hunger started as a dull ache and has since sharpened into a constant, gnawing pain in your stomach. You feel weak, lightheaded. Your body is being deliberately weakened, humbled. This wasn't just about physical deprivation, it was a deeply spiritual exercise. Fasting was a way of taming the flesh, of subjugating the sinful, worldly part of yourself to elevate the spiritual. By denying your body, you were supposedly clarifying your soul, making it more receptive to the divine. It was a common practice before any major spiritual undertaking. And your trial was being treated as the most major undertaking of your life. Alongside the fast, there was the prayer. Father Michael had instructed you to spend as much time as possible on your knees, praying for guidance, for mercy, for the truth to be revealed. Your small, smoky hut became a makeshift monastic cell. You've repeated the Pater Noster and the Ave Maria until the Latin words have lost their meaning, becoming a hypnotic, desperate chant. The prayers are not just for your own benefit. The entire community, in theory, was supposed to be praying with and for you. This created a powerful psychological pressure. You were the focus of the village's spiritual attention. This could feel supportive, a community lifting you up. Or it could feel like an immense weight, 100 pairs of eyes on you, judging your piety, watching for any sign of wavering. The third element of your preparation was a form of isolation. You were to avoid unnecessary contact with others, to remain in a state of quiet contemplation. This meant no work in the fields, no idle chat with neighbors. It cut you off from your normal life, from the very routines that defined you. You were being set apart, marked as different. You were in a liminal state, a man in a liminal state, caught between the human world and a divine verdict. The psychological toll of these 3 days is immense. The combination of hunger, exhaustion from constant prayer, and profound social isolation is a potent recipe for altering one's mental state. You're not thinking clearly. The world feels slightly unreal, dreamlike. This was perhaps part of the point. The ordeal was not meant to be faced with a clear, rational mind. It was meant to be an overwhelming, transcendent experience. By stripping away your physical strength and your social connections, the system made you more vulnerable, more open, more suggestible. Some historians have argued that this preparatory period was a form of psychological torture designed to break down the accused and extract a confession. Faced with the terror of the ordeal, weakened by hunger, and isolated with their own guilt, many might have simply given up and confessed, unable to face the final test. But confession was always the preferred outcome. It avoided the messy, ambiguous business of interpreting a burn wound. There are records of accused individuals confessing at the last possible moment, right before being handed the hot iron. A little known but fascinating detail of this process is that in some legal codes, your accuser in this case, Reginald, was also required to undergo the same fast and prayer. It was a way of ensuring that he too was spiritually prepared and serious in his accusation. It prevented people from making frivolous claims, as they would have to endure the same hardship as the person they accused. Whether this was happening to Reginald, you don't know. You haven't seen him, but the idea that he too might be sitting in his hut, hungry and praying, adds another strange layer of symmetry to this whole nightmare. Now, as the acolyte waits at your door, the 3 days are over. Your body is weak, but your senses are strangely sharp. The smell of the wood smoke in the air, the feel of the rough wool of your tunic, the anxious thumping of your own heart, it's all amplified. You are hollowed out, ready to be filled with whatever judgment is coming. You take a deep breath, the air thin and unsatisfying in your empty stomach. You nod to the boy. You are ready. You step out of your hut, leaving the familiar darkness behind, and walk into the bright, expectant world that has gathered to watch you face the fire. The weakness in your limbs is profound, and you wonder if you'll even have the strength to hold the iron, let alone walk the 9 feet. Following the young acolyte, you walk the short distance from your hut to the church. Every step is a conscious effort. The crowd that has gathered parts for you, a silent, human corridor. Their faces are a blur of morbid curiosity. You don't meet their eyes. You fix your gaze on the stone archway of the church door, the only solid, unwavering thing in a world that has turned fluid and terrifying. You step inside, and the difference is immediate. The bright chaos of the churchyard gives way to cool, solemn shadow. The air is heavy with the scent of old stone, melting beeswax, and the faint, sweet smell of incense. It's a space designed to make you feel small, to draw your eyes upward to the high, dark embers of the roof and, by extension, to God. The church isn't packed with spectators. Only the key participants are allowed inside for this first, most sacred part of the ceremony. The Baron is there, standing near the altar, his expression unreadable. Your accuser, Reginald, is on the other side, his face pale and tight. A few of the village elders are present as official witnesses. And of course, there is Father Michael, standing before the altar in his ceremonial vestments. But your attention is drawn to the center of the aisle. A small brazier of coals has been set up, it creating a shimmering distortion in the air around it, and resting in the glowing heart of the coals is a thick, dark bar of iron. It doesn't look like much. It's an ordinary functional piece of metal, but right now, it is the most terrifying object you have ever seen. It is your fate, being heated to a divine temperature. The final mass before the ordeal begins. Father Michael's voice fills the church, the familiar Latin chants washing over you. Normally, the rhythm of the mass is a comfort. Today, it's the soundtrack to your escalating dread. Every prayer, every reading, seems to be directed at you, laden with meaning about truth, judgment, and divine wrath. This is not a regular Sunday service. This is the official church-sanctioned prelude to a legal verdict. The integration of a legal procedure into the highest sacrament of the church, the Mass, was a critical feature of the ordeal. It's what gave the practice its ultimate legitimacy. This wasn't a Lord's crude justice, this was God's justice, administered through his ordained servants. After the gospel reading, Father Michael turns from the altar and faces the brazier. This is the moment. He begins the Benedictio Feri, the blessing of the iron. He sprinkles it with holy water, which sizzles and evaporates in an instant, a tiny angry hiss. He swings the thurible, and clouds of incense envelop the glowing metal. The sweet smoke, a strange counterpoint to the raw, metallic heat. He then recites the formal prayer of consecration. You don't understand all the Latin, but you catch words you recognize: Deus God, judicium judgment, in no sense innocent, ignis fire. He is formally asking God to imbue this piece of metal with his power. He is praying that the fire will be a tool of discernment, but it will know your heart. An interesting and often overlooked detail is what these prayers actually said. They weren't just a generic plea for a sign. Many of the surviving liturgical texts for ordeals contain incredibly specific language. For instance, a prayer might say, "O God, the just judge, we humbly beseech thee to bless and sanctify this iron, which is to be used in the examination of this case, that if this man be innocent of the charge, he may take it in his hand and be in no wise hurt, but if he be guilty, may thy just judgment so declare it, that his hand be burned, and all may see the power of thy justice." It was a direct, explicit instruction to God on how the miracle should work. The level of clerical involvement is something historians still debate. By the early 13th century, the Central Church authorities were becoming increasingly skeptical of ordeals. Popes and theologians started to argue that it was a form of tempting God, of demanding a miracle on human terms, which was theologically problematic. They questioned whether a priest should be a willing participant in a procedure that was, in essence, a magical ritual dressed up in Christian prayers, because centuries before that, and especially out here in the rural provinces, the local clergy were the essential administrators of the system. Was Father Michael a true believer in this process, or was he just following the ancient customs of his office, a custom he was perhaps beginning to doubt? His impassive face gives nothing away. The blessing is complete. The iron, now officially a holy artifact, continues to glow in the coals, seemingly pulsing with a malevolent energy. The Mass continues. Soon after that, it will be time for you to approach the brazier. The sacredom, the judicial have become completely intertwined. The line between praying for your soul and pleading your case has been erased. The church has become your courtroom, and the altar is the judge's bench. The Mass reaches its solemn peak, the moment of communion. Father Michael holds up the host, the small, white wafer of unleavened bread that, in the doctrine of the Church, has just been transubstantiated into the body of Christ. His voice echoes in the stone chamber, Ex Agnus Dei, behold the Lamb of God. You are the first to approach the altar. Your steps are unsteady, your legs trembling from weakness and fear. You kneel on the hard stone step. According to theological belief, to receive the Eucharist while in a state of mortal sin, which you would be if you were lying about your innocence, is a profound act of sacrilege. It's like inviting the purest good into a soul corrupted by evil. The consequences ought to be dire, both spiritually and sometimes, as in the ordeal of the cursed morsel, physically. As Father Michael places the wafer on your tongue, your mouth is dry as dust. For a terrifying second, you fear you won't be able to swallow it. It feels thick, heavy, sticking to the roof of your mouth. You see Reginald watching you, his eyes narrowed, searching for any sign of choking or hesitation. You force yourself to swallow. It goes down. A small, silent victory. You return to your spot, your heart pounding. The ritual continues, but you are barely aware of it. Your mind is fixed on the glowing iron in the brazier. After the final blessing of the Mass, the spectators outside are allowed to file into the back of the church. The nave fills with the sound of shuffling feet and hushed whispers. The air grows thick with the heat of too many bodies. The show is about to begin. Father Michael now turns his full attention to you. But instead of immediately proceeding to the ordeal, he does something unexpected. He gestures for you to approach him, away from the brazier, near the side of the altar. The Baron and Reginald are close enough to hear, but this moment feels intensely personal. It's a final, quiet interlude before the fiery climax. "My son," the priest says, his voice much softer now, losing its liturgical booming quality. "You have taken the body of our Lord into yourself. Before God and these witnesses, I ask you one last time, are you innocent of the crime of which you are accused? This is the last exit, the final chance to confess. The whole elaborate, terrifying ritual has been building to this point, designed to break your will. Confess now, And you will be guilty, but you will avoid the fire. The punishment might be severe, a heavy fine, perhaps branding or a period in the stocks, but it will be a known, human punishment. What lies on the other side of the ordeal is an unknown, a judgment delivered by searing metal. You look into the priest's eyes. You try to read them. Is this a genuine pastoral plea for your soul, or is it a legal maneuver, the system's last attempt to secure a clean, unambiguous confession? I am innocent, Father, you say, your voice a hoarse whisper. Father Michael holds your gaze for a long moment. The judgment of God is a fearsome thing, he continues, his voice low and even. He sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Are you certain that your heart is pure enough to withstand this test? His words are a double-edged sword. On the surface, they are a standard religious warning. But underneath, you feel a current of something else. Is it a threat, a warning, or an offer of guidance? This is a moment that historians can only speculate about. What really happened in these quiet, unrecorded conversations between priest and accused? Some scholars argue that this was the point where the real verdict was often negotiated. A priest, having a good sense of the community and perhaps his own opinion of the case, could subtly influence the outcome. He might say, confess now, my son, and I will plead with the Baron for mercy on your behalf. This was an offer of a plea bargain. Or if he believed you were innocent, he might whisper, trust in the Lord. He protects his own. Do not be afraid. This was a boost of confidence, a psychological preparation for the terror to come. And then there's the most cynical and debated possibility. Could this be the moment of practical instruction? Could a priest, convinced of your innocence and the injustice of the trial, have whispered, make sure your hand is moist with the holy water when you take the iron, or do not hesitate, grasp it firmly and walk swiftly? This would be a direct attempt to manipulate the physical outcome, to help create the miracle that would prove your innocence. It would be an act of immense kindness or immense hubris, depending on your perspective. Was the priest a co-conspirator in a holy fraud, all for the sake of what he perceived to be justice? It's a question that hangs heavy and unanswered over the entire practice of the ordeal. Father Michael says nothing so explicit. His face is a mask of priestly gravity, but his words hang in the air, ambiguous and heavy. Remember, he says, his voice dropping to a near whisper, the outcome is not in your hands, nor in mine. It is in God's. Pray that he makes his judgment clear, so that all may see. He gives you a final, searching look, then turns away, his duty done. The quiet moment is over. The path of confession is closed. The only way forward now is through the fire. He has given you one last chance to reconsider, and in his cryptic words, you can't be sure if he was offering you a way out, or simply steeling you for the pain to come. The time for words is over. The time for action is now. Father Michael raises his hand, a signal to the two burly lay brothers who have been standing near the brazier. With a long pair of iron tongs, they reach into the heart of the coals. The sound is faint, but in the dead silence of the church, it's as loud as a scream. The scrape of the tongs against the iron bar, they lift it from the fire. The world seems to shrink until it contains only you and that object, suspended in the air. It's no longer a dull, dark bar of metal. It is alive with heat, glowing a bright, angry orange red, the edges shimmering towards a blinding yellow-white. It doesn't seem solid. It seems to pulse, to breathe, radiating a palpable wave of heat that you can feel on your face, even from several feet away. The air above it ripples and dances. Little flecks of incandescent scale flake off and die in the air, like malevolent fireflies. This is it. The abstract concept of the ordeal has become a physical reality, a piece of burning metal that you are about to hold. All the theological arguments, all the legal history, all the psychological pressure, it all comes down to this. Your flesh against this fire. The lay brothers, their faces grim and set, carry the iron towards you. They move with a practiced, solemn deliberation. One of them holds the tongs, the other walks beside him, as if escorting a holy relic. And in a way it is. It has been blessed, consecrated. It is a tool of God. They stop in front of you. The heat is intense. It's like standing too close to a blacksmith forge. It prickles your skin and makes your eyes water. The smell is sharp, ozone, the smell of superheated metal. Meanwhile, Father Michael has paced out the required distance. He marks the starting point just in front of you, and the finish line, 9 of your own foot lengths away. 9 feet. It looks like an infinite chasm. A small cross has been placed on the floor to mark the end. All you have to do is walk to that cross. You look at your hands. They are trembling not just from fear, but from the physical weakness of your 3-day fast. You clench and unclench them, trying to summon some strength, some resolve. You remember the holy water from the priest's blessing. Your palms are still faintly damp. You pray that it's enough. You pray for the Leiden frost effect, though you don't know its name. You pray for a miracle. The priest makes the sign of the cross over you one last time. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit he intones. Proceed. The lay brother holding the tongs lowers the glowing iron bar until it is level with your outstretched hands. The moment of truth. This is a key point of scholarly contention. How was the iron actually held? Some accounts suggest it was placed directly into the palm. Others imply the accused had to wrap their fingers around it. The method could dramatically change the nature and severity of the burn. Given the task of walking, holding it in your palm seems more plausible, but the details are lost to time, likely varying from place to place. You hold out your dominant hand, your palm upturned as you've been instructed. It feels like you are offering a sacrifice. The brother tilts the tongs. The iron bar rolls off the tongs and onto your flesh. Time seems to stop. The first sensation is not pain. It's a strange, shocking weight. It's heavier than you expected. For a fraction of a second, your brain is simply processing the physical fact of this object in your hand. Then comes the sound. A sharp, violent sizzle. The sound of every drop of moisture, every bit of holy water and sweat on your palm, instantly vaporizing. It's accompanied by a smell you will never forget for the rest of your life, the smell of your own skin burning. It's a sickeningly sweet, acrid scent, like roasting meat, but horribly, intimately wrong. And then, the pain hits. It is not a normal pain. It is a white-hot, or consuming agony in your hand and shoots up your arm. It's so intense that it transcends mere sensation and becomes a pure, deafening noise in your head. Every nerve ending in your palm is screaming at once. Your vision tunnels. The faces of the crowd, the stone pillars of the church, Father Michael's grave expression, it all blurs into a meaningless swirl of color at the edge of your sight. Your only instinct is to drop it, to scream, to pull away. But you can't. The entire trial, your entire future, depends on you holding on to the source of unbearable agony and walking. The weight of the iron is not just physical. It is the weight of your own innocence, your life, your reputation. You take the first step. Your leg feels disconnected from your body, a clumsy puppet limb moving on some long-forgotten command. The stones of the church floor are cold and uneven under your thin leather shoes. The contrast between the coolness of the stone and the supernova of pain in your hand is a dizzying, sickening disconnect. 1 step, 8 feet to go. The world is a roaring tunnel of white noise and pain. Your hand is no longer a part of you. It's a foreign object, a crucible of pure suffering that you are forced to carry. The iron seems to be searing itself through your flesh, branding you down to the bone. You can feel your skin blistering, yielding, giving way to the incredible heat. Your eyes are locked on the small wooden cross on the floor, the finish line. It seems to be miles away, a distant shore you will never reach. You hear sounds from the periphery, distorted and strange, as if coming from underwater. A collective gasp from the crowd when the iron first touched your skin. A low murmur rippling through the nave. Is it pity? Is it horror? Is it morbid satisfaction? You can't tell. Their faces are a single, pale, watching entity. You see Reginald Dest's face, white as a sheet. He looks not triumphant, but terrified. Perhaps he never imagined it would come to this. Perhaps he is seeing, for the first time, the real, physical cost of his accusation. This is the part of the ordeal that is pure theater. Your pain is a public performance. Your ability to endure it is a testament to your conviction. If you were to scream and drop the iron now, you would almost certainly be taken as an admission of guilt. God, they would say, did not give you the strength to bear the burden because your cause was unjust. So you bite down on your tongue, the sharp, coppery taste of blood, a small secondary pain that you can almost focus on. 2 steps. You're a third of the way there. Your arm is shaking violently now, the muscle spasming from the effort of holding the iron and the shock to your nervous system. You have to use your other hand to support your burning arm, cupping your elbow to try and keep it steady. The weight seems to be increasing with every moment, as if the iron is drawing all the strength out of your body. A fascinating question that historians and anthropologists ponder is the role of altered states of consciousness in these rituals. The combination of fasting, intense psychological pressure, religious fervor, and now extreme pain could easily induce a trance-like state. Are you even fully present in this moment, or has your mind, as a self-defense mechanism, detached itself from the raw physical agony? You might be operating on a primal, instinctual level, your conscious thought all but obliterated. You are no longer a person, you are a will, a single, focused intention. Reach the cross. 3 steps. You are at the halfway point, though you can't be sure. Time has lost all meaning. It is measured only in heartbeats and searing pulses of pain. You think of the stories of saints who endured torture without flinching, their faith a shield against all pain. You are no saint. You can feel every agonizing second of this. The shield has not appeared. The fire has not been cooled. You feel a surge of despair. Is this it? Is this God's judgment? Is the pain itself the verdict? 4 steps. 5. Each one is a monumental effort of will. You are moving in a slow, shuffling parody of a walk. Your breath is coming in ragged, painful sobs, but you swallow the sound. The silence of the church is broken only by the shuffle of your feet on the stone and the furious, desperate pounding of your own blood in your ears. A strange detail from some historical accounts of ordeals is the presence of music. Sometimes psalms or hymns would be chanted during the ordeal. Imagine that. Your walk of agony, set to music. It could be seen as a way to bolster the spirit of the accused, or it could be a way to heighten the dramatic tension for the audience, a sacred and terrifying soundtrack for the judgment of God. In your church, however, there is only silence, a heavy, expectant silence that presses in on you, making your personal torment the only sound in the universe. 6 steps. 7. You are almost there. The cross on the floor is clearer now. It's just a few feet away. You can see the grain of the wood. It is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. It is the end of the pain. You summon the last of your strength, a final, desperate surge of adrenaline. You lurch forward. 8 steps. 9. You have arrived. You reach the cross on the floor and your body gives out. You don't so much stop walking as you do collapse, stumbling forward onto your knees. The iron that cursed, agonizing weight falls from your hand. It lands on the stone floor with a loud, definitive clang that echoes through the entire church. The sound breaks the spell of silence. It's the sound of finality. It's over. The walking part, at least. For a moment, you just kneel there, head bowed, gasping for air. The pain in your hand, now that it is free, somehow intensifies. It's a throbbing, radiant agony, a son of pain that seems to have its own gravitational pull. You can't look at it. You don't want to see the ruin the iron has left behind. You cradle your injured hand against your chest, as if you could protect it now that the damage is done. The immediate aftermath of the ordeal is as crucial and ritualized as the event itself. As you kneel there trembling, Father Michael and the 2 lay brothers are instantly at your side. One of them quickly uses the tongs to retrieve the iron bar from the floor and places it back into the brazier. Its purpose is served. It is once again just a piece of metal. Father Michael helps you to your feet. You are unsteady, leaning on him for support. The faces of the crowd are swimming before your eyes. You can hear a low collective exhalation, the sound of 100 people releasing the breath they were all holding. You have successfully completed the test. You did not drop the iron. You did not scream out, or at least not too loudly. You walked the 9 feet. But this does not mean you are innocent. This was merely stage 1. The real judgment, the interpretation of the results, is yet to come. What you did or didn't do during the walk is still significant. Dropping the iron prematurely was often seen as a sign of guilt. In some legal traditions, if you dropped it, you might be given a second or even a third chance to pick it up and continue. However, This failure would be noted and would weigh against you. The ordeal was as much a test of will and fortitude as it was a divine sign. Your successful completion is a point in your favor, but it is not the deciding factor. Father Michael leads you toward the altar. A small table has been set up there, holding a bowl of what you recognize as holy water, some clean linen cloths, and a small pot of something that looks like a salve. This is the sacred first aid station. The priest takes your hand gently. You flinch, a wave of nausea washing over you as he extends your arm. You force yourself to look at your palm. It's a disaster. The skin is angry, reddened white, blistered and weeping. The path where the iron rested is a stark, brutal brand. It doesn't look like a wound that could possibly heal cleanly. It looks like the start of a heal cleanly. It looks like the spear crashes over you. How could this possibly be a sign of innocence? This is a critical and often misunderstood part of the process. The expectation wasn't always a complete lack of injury. While a truly miraculous, untouched hand was the best case scenario, the more common standard for innocence was a wound that healed cleanly. The question was not did it burn you, but rather will God's grace prevent the burn from corrupting. Father Michael begins the next phase of the ritual. He washes your hand with holy water, the cool liquid a momentary, shocking relief against the fire of the burn. He then takes a dab of a salve, a mixture of consecrated oil and healing herbs, a practice known as chrismation, and applies it to the wound. This act is deeply symbolic. The church is not just judging you, it is also ministering to you. It is applying its sacred medicine to the wound that its sacred justice has just inflicted. The logic here is fascinatedly circular. Is the salve meant to actually help the wound heal, thereby demonstrating God's favor? Or is it simply part of the ritual? Some cynical historians might suggest that a priest would use a genuinely effective medicinal salve. A priest who believed you were guilty might use something inert or even an irritant. The divine judgment could once again be guided by a human hand. The debate over the placebo effect versus active clerical intervention in these post-ordeal treatments is a lively one in academic circles. After the salve is applied, the final and most important step begins. The priest carefully wraps your entire hand in a long strip of clean linen, covering the wound completely. It's not just a bandage, it's a seal. Once your hand is wrapped, he takes a cord and ties it shut, and at the knot, he places a blob of warm wax and impresses it with the seal of the church, perhaps across all the bishop's insignia. This seal is everything. It is the guarantee that the verdict cannot be tampered with. You cannot unwrap the bandage to treat your wound with your own folk remedies. No one else can interfere. The wound is now in God's hands alone, protected from human intervention by the authority of the church. Any sign of the seal being broken before the appointed time would immediately render the trial null and void, and would be taken as a sign of your guilt. Your hand, now a swaddled, throbbing mass of pain, is a sacred object. It is a sealed piece of evidence, awaiting its day in court. The public part of your trial is over. Now, the quiet, terrifying part begins, the waiting. With your hand wrapped and sealed, a strange sense of anticlimax settles over the church. The great dramatic test is done. Now, there is only process. Father Michael helps you to your feet, your legs still unsteady. The Baron gives a curt nod, his face as impassive as ever. The show is over. He issues his orders. You are to be sequestered for the next 3 days. You will not return to your own hut. Instead, you are to be kept in a small, secure room, perhaps an antechamber in the church or a storeroom in the manor. The official reason is to ensure the sanctity of the trial's final phase, to prevent you from tampering with the seal or receiving any unsanctioned medical aid. But there's another, more practical reason for this isolation. It's to protect you, or, perhaps more accurately, to protect the community from the messy consequences of the trial. If your wound festers and you are declared guilty, emotions will run high. Keeping you separate prevents any immediate acts of mob justice, or attempts by your family to intervene. It keeps the whole situation under the Lord's control. You are led away. As you walk out of the church, the crowd parts once more. Their faces are different now. The morbid excitement has been replaced by a quiet, watchful waiting. You are no longer a spectacle, you are a living, breathing question mark. Your fate hangs in the balance, and your entire community is waiting for the answer. You are taken to a small, windowless room at the back of the church. It smells of old incense and damp stone. There's a simple straw pallet on the floor and a wooden bucket in the corner. A loaf of bread and a skin of water are placed on the floor. The door is closed, and you hear the heavy sound of a bar sliding into place. You are alone with the throbbing, relentless pain in your hand. The next 3 days are a slow, agonizing crawl through time. Each minute stretches into an hour. The world shrinks to the 4 stone walls of your cell and the fiery universe of pain that is your bandaged hand. The first day is the worst. The initial shock has worn off, and the pain settles into a deep, foundational rhythm. It's a constant, pulsing beat that you can't escape. It's in your hand, up your arm, and seems to echo in your skull. You try to sleep, but the pain jerks you awake every few minutes. You lie on the straw, staring into the darkness, your mind replaying the events in the church over and over. The glowing iron, the sizzle. This period of waiting is the final psychological component of the ordeal. It's a time of intense uncertainty and fear. You have no way of knowing what's happening under the bandage. Is the skin knitting together cleanly, or is it blistering further, turning angry and infected? Every throb of pain can be interpreted as a bad sign. A moment of relative calm might be a flicker of hope. You are trapped with your own biology, desperately trying to read the signs your body is giving you. There's a strange historical footnote to this part of the process. In some places, there were specific prayers prescribed for the accused during these 3 days of waiting. They weren't just general prayers for mercy, they were prayers aimed directly at the wound, asking God to promote clean healing and prevent the poison of corruption from setting in. It's a fascinating insight into their understanding of medicine and faith. A form of spiritual antiseptic. On the second day, a new fear joins the pain, the fear of infection. You know what a bad wound looks like. You've seen it in animals, and you've seen it in people. A cut from a scythe that goes bad, a leg wound from a fall that turns black and foul-smelling. In a world without antibiotics, any significant wound is a potential death sentence. Sepsis, which they would have called blood poisoning or corruption, was a common and terrifying killer. So the judgment you're waiting for is twofold. The priest and the baron will judge your wound, determine your guilt. But your body is passing its own judgment on the wound, deciding whether it will heal or fester. The two are inextricably linked. A guilty verdict from the priest might be followed by a death sentence from the infection. The stakes are getting higher with every passing hour. Did people die from these ordeals? It's a question that's difficult to answer definitively from the historical record. But the answer is almost certainly yes. While the ordeals themselves were not designed to be fatal punishments, the aftermath could be. A severe burn from hot iron or boiling water would be a prime entry point for deadly bacteria like Clostridium tetani, which causes tetanus or staphylococcus. An innocent verdict was no guarantee of survival if a bad infection had already taken hold. The academic consensus is that while the ordeal was a trial, its potential lethality was an implicit and understood risk. By the third day, you are in a state of exhausted delirium. The pain, the hunger, the fear, and the lack of sleep have all blended together into a single, miserable state of being. You have lost track of time. The world outside your cell has ceased to exist. There is only the darkness, the stone, and the sealed, ticking time bomb at the end of your arm. Then you hear it, the sound of the bar being lifted from the door. Footsteps approaching. It's time. The 3 days are up. The moment of truth, the real moment of truth, has finally arrived. The door to your cell creaks open, flooding the small space with a rectangle of grey, morning light. You have to squint, your eyes having grown accustomed to the near-total darkness. Standing in the doorway is the same young acolyte who led you to the church 3 days ago. His face is solemn. It is time. He says the same words as before, but now they carry the weight of finality. You struggle to your feet, your limbs stiffened, clumsy. You are weak from lack of food and sleep, but a surge of nervous energy, cold and sharp, cuts through the fatigue. This is it. There is no more waiting. You are led back into the main body of the church. The scene is a near-perfect recreation of the trial, but the atmosphere is different. The crowd is back, filling the nave, but their mood is not one of morbid excitement. It's one of tense, almost fearful anticipation. The key players are all in their places. The Baron, standing with his arms crossed, his face a stony mask of authority. Your accuser, Reginald, looking nervous and haggard, twisting a piece of cloth in his hands, and Father Michael, waiting by the altar, his expression serene and unreadable. There is no brazier this time. No glowing iron. The only focus of attention is a small wooden table placed in the center of the aisle. It is bare, waiting. Father Michael gestures for you to come forward. You walk the same path you walked with the burning iron, but this time the journey feels different. It's not a test of endurance, but a walk to the gallows, or to freedom. You don't know which. You stand before the priest, your heart hammering against your ribs so hard you feel it in your throat. He takes your bandaged hand. His touch is light, professional. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, he begins, his voice ringing out in the silent church. We are gathered here to witness the judgment of God. For 3 days, this hand has been sealed under the protection of Holy Mother Church. We shall now reveal the wound, and in it we shall read the will of the Almighty. He holds your hand over the table. With a small, sharp knife, he carefully slices through the wax seal. The cracking of the wax is a tiny, sharp sound, but it echoes with significance. The seal is broken. The period of sacred waiting is officially over. Then slowly, deliberately, he begins to unwind the linen bandage. Round and round it goes. With each layer of cloth that is removed, the tension in the room mounts. The crowd leans forward as one. You hold your breath. The pain in your hand has been a constant companion for 3 days, a dull, throbbing ache. But you have no idea what lies beneath the wrappings. You have imagined the worst of festering, suppurating mess. The skin black and peeling, an undeniable sign of corruption and guilt. The last layer of the bandage comes away. Father Michael holds your hand up for all to see. You force yourself to look, and what you see makes your mind reel. It's not clean. It's not a miracle. It's not the untouched hand of a saint from a legend. It is without a doubt a burn. A bad one. The skin is a patchwork of angry red and an alarming, waxy white. It's blistered in several places. It's a gruesome, ugly wound. I gasp ripples through the crowd. You see Reginald's eyes go wide. Your heart sinks like a stone. This is it. This is guilt. This is the sign of corruption. But then, Father Michael does something unexpected. He leans in closer, examining the wound with an expert's eye. He touches the skin around the edges of the burn. He looks at the blisters. He brings it close to his nose, smelling it. This clinical examination feels bizarrely disconnected from the divine nature of the event. What exactly constituted a guilty wound versus an innocent one? This is one of the most hotly debated questions about the ordeal. The surviving legal texts are often frustratingly vague. Simply saying a wound that is unclean or festering putridum is a sign of guilt. But the definition of unclean was left to the interpretation of the presiding priest. Was any sign of pus automatically guilt? Were blisters a bad sign, or was it more about the overall character of the wound? Some historians argue that priests, especially in rural areas, had a great deal of practical medical knowledge. They knew the difference between the normal inflammation of a healing burn and the signs of a truly dangerous infection: discoloration, a foul smell, the tracking of red lines up the arm. The judgment might about a binary clean versus unclean and more of a medical prognosis. If the wound looked like it was on a path to healing, no matter how ugly it was at that moment, it could be declared clean. If it showed the undeniable signs of a raging, life-threatening infection, it was unclean. This would mean the ordeal was less a judgment of past sin and more a prediction of future survival. After a long, agonizing moment, Father Michael straightens up. He turns not to you, but to the entire church. He raises his voice so that everyone can hear. The flesh is burned, he declares, his voice booming, as it was bound to be by the fire. But behold, He points to the wound. There is no corruption. There is no poison. The blisters are filled with clear water, not the pus of sin. The flesh around it is healthy. It is a clean wound. He turns to you, and for the first time, a smile touches his lips. God has shown his favor. The wound is healing. He has judged you. Innocent. The word innocent hangs in the air for a heartbeat. And then the church erupts. A wave of sound washes over you, gasped shouts. A swell of relieved chatter. The tension that has held the village captive for days breaks all at once. People are turning to each other, murmuring, pointing. Your family, who had been huddled at the back of the church, lets out a collective cry of joy. You just stand there, swaying on your feet, the priest's declaration echoing in your ears. Innocent, the world which had narrowed to a pinprick of pain and fear, suddenly rushes back in, bright and overwhelming. The stone pillars, the faces in the crowd, the lights slanting through the high windows, it's all still there. Your life is not over. Your gaze falls on Reginald. His face has crumbled. The anger and certainty are gone, replaced by a mixture of shock, confusion, and a dawning public shame. He stumbles back a step, looking from your wounded hand to the priest, to the Baron. The divine judgment he called for has been delivered, and it has been delivered against him. In the eyes of God and the entire community, he is now the liar. He is the one who bore false witness against his neighbor. The consequences for a failed accuser could be severe. In some legal systems, the principle of lex talionis is an eye, for an eye was applied. A failed accuser could be subjected to the same punishment the accused would have faced if found guilty. Would Reginald have to pay you the value of an ox? Would he be fined by the Baron? Or would the public humiliation be considered punishment enough? This often depended on the local custom and the mood of the Lord. The daggers of 100 pairs of eyes are his sentence. He shrinks under their gaze and slips out of the church, a defeated man. The Baron steps forward, a grimly satisfied look on his face. The system has worked. A judgment has been rendered, the dispute is settled, and order is restored. Justice has been done, he announces to the crowd. Let this be a lesson to all. The truth will always be revealed. His pronouncement officially closes the case. People are crowding around you now, clapping you on the back, carefully avoiding your injured arm. Their voices a babble of congratulations. The very same people who whispered about you in the street are now celebrating your vindication. Your reputation, so close to being destroyed, has been miraculously restored and then some. You are not just an innocent man, you are the man God himself declared innocent. You are the man, strange kind of status. You are the man who held the fire and was saved. Father Michael, his official duties over, tends to your hand with a new gentleness. He cleans the wound again and applies a different, more potent-smelling salve before bandaging it loosely. You will need to care for this, he says, his voice low and kind. It will be a scar to remind you of God's mercy. You look at the raw, burned flesh of your palm. A scar? Yes, it will be. A permanent, puckered map of this entire nightmare. It will be there every time you grip a tool, every time you lift a pail of water, every time you hold your children's hands. A constant reminder. As you leave the church, blinking in the full light of day, the world looks different, or maybe you are different. The ordeal has changed you. It has pushed you to the absolute limit of your physical and mental endurance. It has shown you the terrifying fragility of your life and the strange, arbitrary nature of the world you live in. But, as the initial euphoria begins to fade, a new set of anxieties starts to creep in. Life doesn't just snap back to normal. The wound in your hand is real and debilitating. How will you work in the fields? A farmer with only one good hand is at a serious disadvantage. Your family will have to work harder to cover for you. The harvest might suffer. Your innocence came at a steep economic price. And what about Reginald? You have to continue living next to the man who tried to ruin you. The divine judgment may have settled the legal case, but it doesn't magically mend the torn fabric of the community. There will be awkward silence, averted gazes. His family and your family will now be locked in a permanent, simmering feud. The village is small, and the memory of this event will be long. There's a little-known concept from some medieval legal studies called post-ordeal trauma. While they wouldn't have used that term, there's a recognition that undergoing such an experience was deeply scarring in more ways than one. Some accounts suggest that people who passed an ordeal were sometimes seen as touched or strange, set apart from ordinary folk by their experience. They had been to the brink and back. You may be innocent, but you are no longer the same, literally and figuratively. For now, though, you are a hero. You are the protagonist of a story that will be told and retold in the village for generations. The story of the dead ox, the false accusation, and the man whose innocence was proven in the heart of the fire. You walk home, surrounded by your relieved family, the pain in your hand a dull throb, a steady beat marking the first day of the rest of your new, complicated life. Let's pause for a moment and rewind the tape. Let's step back into that silent, tension-filled church to the moment Father Michael unwraps the final layer of linen from your hand. But this time, let's imagine a different outcome. The bandage comes away, and the sight is far, far worse. It's not just red and blistered. The skin around the burn is an angry, swollen purple. The blisters are not filled with clear fluid, but with a thick, yellowish pus, and from the wound comes a faint but distinct foul odor, the smell of decay, of corruption. The flesh itself looks rotten, lifeless. A different kind of gas ripples through the crowd. Not of shock, but of horror and confirmation. This is what they were expecting. This is the unmistakable sign of a festering wound. Father Michael recoils slightly. He doesn't need to lean in and examine this one. The verdict is plain for all to see. It is written on your hand in the language of rot. He makes the sign of the cross, not as a blessing, but as if to ward off the evil that has been made manifest. He straightens up, and his face is no longer serene. It is a mask of grim, divine certainty. He raises his voice, and this time it holds no hint of a smile. It is the voice of doom. Behold the judgment of God. He bellows, pointing a trembling finger at your hand. The wound is poisoned. It is corrupt. It festers with the filth of the lie it was intended to cover. God has refused his grace. He has shown us the truth in this man's heart. He turns his gaze on you, and his eyes are cold stones. God has judged you. Guilty. The word lands like a physical blow. It sucks all the air from your lungs. The church, which had exploded in joy in our other timeline, is now filled with a low, menacing growl. The faces in the crowd are no longer relieved and celebratory. They are hard, accusing, righteous in their anger. Your family lets out a wail of despair, a sound of pure, animal grief. You are no longer a man. You are a sinner, a liar, a criminal unmasked by the hand of God himself. Your denials, your pleas, your suffering, it was all a lie. The pain you endured was not the trial of a righteous man, but the deserved torment of the wicked. The Baron's guard sees you. Their grip is rough, impersonal. There is no gentleness now. You are a condemned man. So what happens next? What is the punishment for your crime? Now divinely confirmed, this is where the system reveals its final, brutal purpose. The ordeal was the trial, this is the sentence. The punishment would vary enormously based on the crime, the local laws, and the whim of the Lord. For the crime you were accused of maliciously destroying your neighbor's essential property, the sentence would be harsh. It would almost certainly begin with a fine. A massive, ruinous fine. You would be ordered to pay Reginald not just the value of his dead ox, but likely double or triple that as a penalty. This alone would bankrupt your family for a generation. You would have to sell everything you owned, your chickens, your tools, any small items of value. You might even have to sell yourself and your family into a more binding form of servitude to the Lord to pay off the debt. But it likely wouldn't end there. A crime proven by ordeal was a serious matter. It was an offense not just against your neighbor, but against the social order and against God. A physical punishment was almost certain. This could mean time in the stocks set up in the village square for all to mock and throw filth at. Humiliation was a key component of medieval punishment. More likely, it would involve mutilation. The idea was to mark the criminal permanently, to make their crime visible on their body, for all to see for the rest of their lives. For a crime of malice and potential theft, the punishment might be branding on the cheek or forehead with a hot iron, a final, ironic twist. Or perhaps more fittingly, they might amputate the hand that was supposed to carry the holy iron, the hand that was now a symbol of your guilt. And in the most severe cases, the punishment could be death. While perhaps unlikely for a dead ox, if the accusation had been more serious murder or treason, a guilty verdict from the ordeal would lead directly to the gallows. A strange and chilling detail of this process is that your accuser, Reginald, would now be seen as a hero. He would be lauded for his faith and perseverance in seeking out the truth. He had trusted in God's justice, and he had been vindicated. His social standing in the village would soar. As the guards drag you from the church, you catch a final glimpse of your hand, the festering, suppurating wound that has condemned you. Was it truly God's judgment, or was it just bad luck, a weaker immune system, a dirtier bandage, a more virulent strain of bacteria that happened to be on the iron bar? You will never know. You are trapped in a system that has no room for doubt, no concept of random chance. The verdict is absolute, the verdict, and irreversible. Your life, as you knew it, is over, and it was all decided by the way your skin reacted to a burn. Let's pull the camera back now, away from your personal fate, be it triumphant or tragic, and look at the bigger picture. This elaborate, terrifying system of divine justice that dominated European law for centuries, how did it end? It didn't just fade away. It was killed. And the blow came from the very institution that had been its greatest champion, the Church. The year is 1215, the place is Rome. Pope Innocent III, one of the most powerful and influential popes in history, is presiding over a massive church council known as the Fourth Lateran Council. This was a huge deal. Hundreds of bishops, abbots, and theologians from all over Christendom were gathered to decide on matters of doctrine and church discipline. They were standardizing beliefs, cracking down on heresy, and essentially trying to organize the messy, sprawling entity that was medieval Christianity into a more coherent and centrally controlled institution. And tucked away among the 70 canons, or decrees, issued by the council, is one that would change the history of law forever. Canon 18. It's a short, seemingly administrative decree. It doesn't use fiery language or condemn ordeals as a pagan evil. It simply states that no priest or cleric of any rank shall participate in, or give any kind of blessing or religious consecration to, any form of trial by ordeal. It specifically forbade them from presiding over the ordeals of hot iron, hot water. It was a direct, unambiguous order: clergy, get out of the courtroom. The reasoning behind this was complex and had been building for some time among elite theologians. As we touched on before, they had grown deeply uncomfortable with the whole idea. Thinkers like Peter the Chanter in Paris had argued forcefully that ordeals were a form of tempting God. You were essentially forcing God's hand, demanding that he perform a miracle on a schedule, which was seen as a profound act of arrogance and divine majesty. God, they argued, reveals his will when and how he chooses, not because a village priest asks him to adjudicate a case about a dead ox. Furthermore, they saw it as a violation of clerical duties. A priest's role was to save souls, to offer sacraments, not to participate in a judicial process that was often bloody and resulted in mutilation or death. The canon law explicitly forbade clergy from being involved in blood judgments. By presiding over an ordeal that could lead directly to a death sentence, a priest was dirtying his consecrated hands. So Pope Innocent III made it official. No more blessings on the iron. No more exorcisms of the water. No more prayers over the cauldron. The effect of this one decree was catastrophic for the ordeal system. It didn't technically outlaw ordeals. The secular lords, the barons and kings, were still free to use them, but it ripped the heart out of the practice. Without the priest, without the mass, without the consecrated elements and the divine blessing, the ordeal lost its entire legitimacy. Imagine your trial without Father Michael. Imagine the baron just heating up a piece of iron in a regular fire and telling you to carry it. It's no longer a judicium Dei, a judgment of God. The entire belief system that underpinned it that God would intervene was predicated on the Church's involvement. By withdrawing, the Church effectively announced to the world that they no longer believed God would show up for these trials. And if the priests didn't believe it, Why should anyone else? The implementation of this decree wasn't instantaneous. News traveled slowly. In some remote, rural areas, the old ways likely continued for a few decades. There's a fascinating and persistent historical debate about how quickly and uniformly the canon was adopted. Some evidence suggests that certain local bishops and priests may have resisted or simply ignored the edict for a while. But the tide had turned. The intellectual and spiritual foundation of the ordeal was shattered. Secular courts and rulers were now faced with a massive problem. They had relied on ordeals for centuries to resolve cases where there was no evidence or witnesses. Now their ultimate tool for finding truth was gone. What were they supposed to do? This created a justice crisis that forced them to innovate. And it's here that we see the very beginnings of the modern legal systems we recognize today. Deprived of divine judgment, courts had to find a new, human way to assess evidence and determine guilt. In England, the withdrawal of the ordeal led directly to the expansion and formalization of the jury system. Instead of asking God what happened, courts started asking a jury of 12 local men. What is the gossip? What is the reputation of the accused? What do you believe happened? It wasn't a jury in our modern sense. They were more like witnesses to the community's consensus, but it was a profound shift. It was the birth of the trial by one's peers. On the European continent, the response was different but equally significant. They turned towards the inquisitorial system, based on Roman law. This involved a judge actively investigating the facts of the case, gathering evidence, and questioning witnesses. And in a dark turn, it also led to a much greater reliance on another method of finding truth: judicial torture to extract a confession. It's a grim irony that the end of the ordeal, which was a form of torture as trial, led to the rise of torture as investigation. So in 1215 the world turned. The age of asking God to be the detective was officially declared over. The long, slow, and often brutal process of humans figuring out how to judge each other had begun in earnest. And it all happened because a group of men in Rome decided that God had better things to do. So, the church pulls the plug, and the whole system of divine judgment begins its slow, inexorable collapse. The great, terrifying theater of the ordeal is dismantled. But ideas, especially ones that have shaped a society for half a millennium, don't just vanish. They leave ghosts. They leave echoes in the culture, in the language, and in the very way people think about justice and proof. Let's fast forward a bit, past your lifetime, past the immediate aftermath of the Fourth Lateran Council. The formal, church-sanctioned ordeal is dead, but its shadow lingers in some strange and unexpected places. One of the most bizarre and persistent legacies was the ordeal of the bier, also known as cruentation. This was a folk belief, and sometimes a semi-official practice, that held a murder victim's body would react in the presence of their killer. The idea was that if the murderer was brought before their victim, the victim's wounds would spontaneously start to bleed again. It's like a supernatural detective story. Imagine a suspected murderer being forced to approach the corpse of the person they allegedly killed. The whole town is watching. The accused has to place their hand on the body. If nothing happens, it proves nothing. But if the old wounds, long since clotted, suddenly begin to weep fresh, red blood, it was taken as an undeniable, miraculous accusation from beyond the grave. This wasn't just a peasant superstition. It was treated with surprising seriousness, even appearing in literature and some legal discussions well into the 16th and 17th centuries. Long after the formal ordeals were a distant memory, Shakespeare even references it in his play Richard II. It's a direct descendant of the ordeal mentality, a belief that the natural world, in this case, a dead body, could be compelled by divine or supernatural force to reveal a hidden truth. Then there's the evolution of the judicial duel. While the church had also frowned upon it, the duel of honor between aristocrats proved much harder to kill. It detached itself from its divine judgment roots and morphed into a matter of personal honor. Gentlemen fought duels not to prove a legal case, but to defend their reputation from an insult. This tradition continued, illegally but often with a wink and a nod from the authorities, right up into the 19th century. The idea that a physical contest can resolve a dispute of truth or honor is a powerful one, and its lineage traces directly back to the trial by combat. Even our language today is littered with the ghosts of these practices. When we talk about a difficult, painful experience, we might call it an ordeal. The word has been stripped of its legal and theological meaning, but it retains the emotional core of a severe test. When we say someone has been put through the ringer or has gone through fire, we are unconsciously echoing the language of these ancient trials. But perhaps the most profound and complex legacy of the ordeal system is in the very thing that replaced it, the jury. As we mentioned, the English jury system grew directly out of the ashes of the ordeal. But for a long time, the jury's role was very different from what we know today. Early juries were not impartial. They were made up of the accused's neighbors. They were expected to know the people involved, to have heard the gossip, to have an opinion. They weren't judging evidence presented to them, they were the evidence. Their verdict was a reflection of the community's consensus. This is a direct parallel to the old system of oath helping, where a person's reputation and the support of their community was their best defense. The jury was, in a sense, a panel of 12 professional oath helpers. The question of why the number of jurors settled on 12 is a fascinating historical puzzle. There is no definitive answer, but many scholars believe it has religious significance, echoing the 12 apostles of Christ or the tribes of Israel. If this is true, it suggests that even as the new, human-centered jury system was developing, it couldn't quite shake the old desire to cloak its decisions in a mantle of religious authority. A jury of 12 good men in truth felt more solemn, more divinely sanctioned than a jury of 10 or 15. It took centuries for the jury to evolve into the impartial, evidence-swaying body we think of today. The idea that a juror should know nothing about the case beforehand is a relatively modern invention. For a very long time, the shadow of the ordeal, the idea that justice is about community knowledge and reputation, persisted. So as you look back on your own trial by fire, you can see its long, strange afterlife. Your personal trauma was part of a massive, continent-spanning legal tradition that, even in its death, shaped the world to come. It forced the invention of new legal technologies, left its mark on our language, and haunted our superstitions for centuries. The ordeal was an attempt to find certainty in an uncertain world by asking for a miracle. When the miracle stopped coming, we were forced to start the long, messy, imperfect process of finding certainty for ourselves. And as our modern legal systems show, with all their complexities and flaws, that's an ordeal we are still going through today. The years pass, the seasons turn, as they always do. The rhythms of planting and harvesting continue. The world moves on, slowly, inexorably. You grow old. The vibrant, terrifying memories of the trial soften at the edges, like a story told one too many times. The Baron has long since passed away, his son now ruling the manor with a different, perhaps more pragmatic style. Father Michael, too, is gone, replaced by a younger priest who has heard whispers of the new decrees from Roman scoffs at the old ways. Reginald died a few years after the trial, a quiet and diminished man. Most of the people who witnessed your ordeal are now just names on graveyard stones. You are one of the last living monuments to that day, and you still have the scar. It's different now. It's no longer an angry, red brand. It's a pale, silvery web of tissue on your palm, smooth and strange to the touch. It pulls at the skin when you make a fist. Most of the time you don't even notice it. But sometimes on a cold morning, or when you're sitting by the fire, you'll look down at your hand and remember. You'll remember the heat, the smell, the impossible weight of that glowing iron. And you will remember the silence in the church. You've had a lifetime to think about it. A lifetime to wonder, why did it happen? Why did we all, you, Reginald, the Baron, the priest, the entire village agree to participate in such a terrifying, seemingly insane system? It's a question your grandchildren, who live in a world where such trials are just wild stories, can never truly understand. But you lived it. And in your old age, you think you've begun to grasp the reasons. The first reason is the simplest. What else was there in a world without detectives, without forensic science, without even a basic concept of evidence? How do you solve a crime when it's just one person's word against another? The alternative was not a neat modern trial. The alternative was chaos. It was a blood feud that could last for generations, with your family ambushing each other in the woods, poisoning wells, burning huts. Endless violence that could tear the village apart. The ordeal, for all its horror, was an end. It provided a final, definitive answer. A terrible certainty was often better than a terrible uncertainty. Then you think about belief. It's easy for the young ones to dismiss it as superstition. But your world was drenched in faith. You saw God's will not just in the church, but in the rain that nourished the crops and the blight that destroyed them, in the miraculous recovery. The world was a constant conversation with the divine. The ordeal wasn't an exception to that, it was the ultimate expression of it. It was simply formalizing the question you asked every day: God, what is your will? To not believe in the ordeal, you would have to not believe in the very fabric of your reality. And yet, you also wonder about the men who ran the system. The Baron, Father Michael, did they believe as fervently as the rest of you? This is the question that nags at you in the quiet of the night. You remember the Baron's impassive face. Perhaps he didn't care if God showed up or not. He just needed a way to end a dispute that was disrupting the work on his manor. The ordeal was a powerful tool of social control, a piece of political theater that reinforced his authority and kept the peace. A guilty verdict was a warning, an innocent one was a relief, but either way, the case was closed. The machine kept running. And Father Michael, was he a devout servant, certain that God would guide the healing of your wound, or was he a pragmatist? A man who knew his community, who perhaps had already made up his mind about your innocence and used his knowledge of salts and bandages to guide God's judgment in the right direction. Historians of the future will debate this endlessly. They will call it genuine faith, cynical manipulation, or a necessary ritual for social cohesion. Lying on your straw pallet, you suspect the truth is that it was all of those things at once, a messy, contradictory tangle of belief, power, and pragmatism. The ordeal system wasn't just a bad idea. It was a solution. A brutal, terrifying, and deeply flawed solution to the impossible problem of knowing the unknowable. It existed for so long because it served a purpose, not just for the powerful, but for the community that desperately needed a way to resolve its own conflicts before they festered and destroyed them from within. You look at your scarred hand one last time. It doesn't throb with pain anymore. It's just a quiet reminder of a world that is fading into myth, a world where justice was a matter of fire and water, and where the verdict was written not in a book of law, but directly onto your own skin. The world of the ordeal, with its searing irons and sacred waters, now begins to dissolve. The sharp edges of the story soften, bleeding into the quiet haze of approaching sleep. The faces of the crowd in the church, the stern gaze of the Baron, the fear in Reginald Death's eyes, they all fade, like embers cooling in the hearth. The weight of the iron in your hand is gone, replaced by the comfortable weight of your own blanket. The shouts and whispers of the village are replaced by the soft, steady hum of the fan in your room, or the gentle quiet of your own home. You are no longer the accused standing trial for your life. You are simply you, here now, safe in your bed. The journey is over. The pain was just a story, the fear just a collection of words. Your own hands are whole and unharmed, resting peacefully at your sides. The frantic, hammering heartbeat of the man facing the fire has slowed, synchronizing with your own deep, rhythmic breathing. You can feel the gentle pull of sleep, a tide drawing you away from the shore of consciousness and out into the consciousness and out into the consciousness, deep ocean of dreams. The past is a distant country, and its gates are now closing. There is only the present moment, this comfortable darkness, this profound and well-deserved peace. Let the last vestiges of the story drift away like smoke, leaving only stillness behind. The end of the article. Good night.